Alors attends, c'est pas encore démarré. Mario, c'est bon.
We are very pleased to welcome four specialists in architecture and in wood sciences and technology. So thank you so much for being here. We are welcoming Organschi. He's an architect. Hi, Alan. He's principal and partner at Organschi Architecture in New Haven, Connecticut, internationally recognized for its integration of design, construction, and environmental research. And he's also director of Innovation Labs at the Bauhaus Earth, which is a global initiative that is exploring how building cities and landscapes contribute to climate restoration. And he's also a senior member at the faculty at the Yale School of Architecture. So thank you so much for being with us. We are also welcoming Andreja. She is director of InnoRenew, COO, an independent research institute based in Slovenia, which explores solutions to the climate crisis in science of buildings and materials. She is also member at the University of Primorska, Andreja Institute, I don't know how to say that, Faculty of Mathematics, Natural Sciences and Information Technology. Andreas Nicolaus Kleinschmit from Lengefeld. He has been Director of Innovation and Research at the l'Institut Technologie SCDA, c'est Forêt Bois, Construction et Ameublement. And he is now founder of Rencontres, a firm which proposes advisory, management, coordination, and support services to strengthen the circular economy and strategic development. And Francesco, professor at the Department of Agricultural, Forest and Food Sciences. So since the 1st of July, he is vice president of the International Society of Food Science and Technology, and he mainly deals with development of food-based products, properties and uses, and also sustainability of wood-based products. So they represent their research activities, also crazy beliefs, to deal with climate crisis, interrogating the link between architecture and wood science and technology. So I will give the word first to Alan, and then Andreja, Andreas, and Francesco. Thank you.
Thank you. Great, can you hear me now? Perfect.
Oh yeah.
I hope you can see the screen as well, but I can't see you, so give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen, all right? Perfect, okay. Marian, thank you. It's really, really nice to see old friends, Andreja, Andreas, Francesco, nice to meet you. Today I want to talk really about a sort of systemic understanding of the role of wood with respect to this critical moment that we face in the end of the Anthropocene, and hopefully the beginning of a kind of Symbiocene, a geologic era in which we live in synergy with natural systems rather than in conflict. All of the things that you probably talked about thus far this week mean nothing if we don't address the back end of our productivity and consumption as a species. This is modern day Tokyo. 39 million people live here. And not only is it the largest megalopolis in the world, urban density at the highest level, it's also the largest stockpile of human-made material. And that has enormous implications if you imagine that we need to build 100 more Tokyos, or nearly 100 more Tokyos in the next 30 years to house 2.3 billion people in the Earth's cities, which will increase land consumption by a factor of 3. It'll produce a building the size of New York State, 2 Irelands, the island of Kyushu in Japan. Take your reference point. And I'm not talking about a city that's 56,000 square miles. I'm talking about a building that's 56,000 square miles. which is great news for the construction sector. $97 trillion worth of value. We're rebuilding an entire civilization of building. But that represents 40%, if you look across the building life cycle, of all anthropogenic human emissions, carbon emissions in particular, carbon equivalents. And I'll talk a little more about embodied emissions. That half of that by 2050 will be associated with embodied emissions, and I'll talk about them a little bit. So if we continue down this path, that means that just the act of building buildings, occupying them, and destroying them at the end of their lives will mean an added 71 billion tons of carbon dioxide and its equivalents emitted into the atmosphere in the next 30 years. And what I'd like to today propose is an alternate scenario, a biomass scenario, in which we not only reduce our emissions and decarbonize the built environment, but we also change the way that we use our materials through our means and methods of building, and potentially to store 48 gigatons of carbon. So really this is a story of two landscapes, the forest standing in for all natural landscapes, and the city standing in for the technosphere, human-made artifacts of their human industry. And that has historically been an antagonistic relationship. The city has consumed the forest. And that the result of that is that, I like to, when I think about Tokyo, I imagine that there's something like a gigantic hole in the ground where we extracted all of those minerals, we used all that fossil hydrocarbon energy to produce all of those buildings to house just 39 million people, not 2.3 billion. And it's really interesting that around 2020, the weight of all of the material that humankind has produced industrially surpassed the weight of all biological material in the world. So now the products of the technosphere, anthropogenic mass, outweigh biomass. So if we look across the entire building life cycle, we begin to understand all of the things that we put into these giant artifacts that we make. Raw material extraction with huge impacts to ecosystems, land conversion, irreversible land conversion, material handling and transport, processing and manufacturing of materials, and then additionally the handling and transport of materials and the systems and assemblies and products that get them to the building, and then the construction of the building itself. And then at the end of the building life cycle, the demolition and disposal of all of that waste. And there's a huge amount of waste that's coming out of the building sector's activities that produce this huge number, this huge percentage of impact that we create, including climate change. And I think the thing that's really important to understand is that we focused for so long on operational emissions, trying to make our buildings more efficient by reducing energy consumption, making super tight, thermally efficient envelopes. But in fact, if you think of it as embodied emissions, the things that are outside of the building operational life, we start to see that there's no way that we can ever catch up with that initial carbon spike we create by building buildings. By extracting the material, processing it, transporting it, constructing the building, renovating the building, and then disposing of it. So we really can't truly make right now net zero buildings. It's a folly and a fiction. And so we look at the kind of climate trajectory right now. This is all very familiar to you. We're climbing towards 430 parts per million of carbon dioxide and its equivalents in the atmosphere. We're nearing the 1.5 degree or 2 degree temperature increase, the kind of guardrail set by the IPCC of the Paris Accords. And it's pretty likely that we continue business as usual building. This is our subject and our agency, building as usual. What we find is that we will blow through those guardrails and start to head rapidly toward hothouse Earth conditions. The alternative is a kind of overshoot where we not only decarbonize, but we find ways to store anthropogenic carbon in the buildings and things that we make. And so that's really what I want to talk about today. This idea of negative emissions through not only decarbonization, carbon mitigation, but actually storage of material. So if we compare the emissions of a ton of concrete, steel, or timber, we see that the question about whether what's a better material is a bit debatable. We can decarbonize steel to improve it, for example. But it's actually a kind of faulty measure, although a typical one. And that is that the strength to weight ratio of timber is so much greater than these mineral-based material systems that have become so generic generic products in building. But if we look at the actual carbon storage capacity and that strength to weight ratio, we start to see enormous benefits. Basically, if you build with timber, you're storing 1.5 tons of carbon for every ton of timber you use. And we can measure that because we can build buildings. So what I'm proposing is this idea that we can create a metabolic, circular, and regenerative building economy through a kind of geotechnology which binds healthy, sustainable forests and their management and protection with massive timber building programs. I'm going to let the others talk about the products that are available to us, but I will focus on one process rather than a product, which is the process of laminating smaller pieces of wood together, now using glues, maybe in the future other kind of mechanical attachments. And finger joining is nearly 100 years old, where we can create great lengths out of short pieces of wood and then combine them in balanced ways, putting the highest quality fibers at the most demanding structural pieces of a structural member, like a glue lamp, which has a tension and compression edge with very high fiber stresses, and we can put cheaper, lesser grade material in the middle of those beams, and we can start to use smaller trees, smaller sticks to create enormous panels, which are highly amenable to incredibly precise manufacturing techniques. And we can even start to think about mixing species based on their capacities. A super hard birch beechwood LVL serves as a replacement for a steel connector in a 5-story building here at Blumer Lehmann in Goslar, Switzerland. Instead of using steel, we're able to use a harder species with harder bearing capacity. And so these products and these techniques that we've made can turn into new assembly systems and tectonics of building, and we now know that we can build multi-story buildings, and they're even recognized in a very conservative code framework, the US IBC code, which operates in North America. We can build up to 18 stories. I think I want to give you a little frame this discussion a little bit with my background and my set of interests. As Marion mentioned, I'm an architect and I work as also a builder. We have a fabrication facility. We've worked at the sort of edge of design and building for the last 25 years at Organschi Architecture. And we studied really techniques of craftsmanship, how we can use these different wood fibers and manipulate their shape to begin to create character in the spaces that we make, and using large panel systems to create really novel structural solutions for houses and civic buildings. And really our work began with a series of bridges that we built, pedestrian bridges at first, then vehicular bridges, where we began to play with the different lamination systems and axes, and to try to figure out different ways to assemble wood. And it was a really great test case for our ability as builders, but also as in our understanding of how wood performs in pretty demanding structural situations. And these grew in scale to the point that we're now working on a bridge along the Hudson River, which is a 400-foot long timber deck over a very light steel hull, which will essentially connect a 9-mile linear park to the Great Hudson River along a beautiful landscape. And also trying to apply these to civic buildings, grandstands for sporting events. We worked on projects to look at different ways of using cross-laminated timbers in inventive ways. Here at a carousel pavilion, a merry-go-round, an event space in a city near where I live. And then the idea of studying how we really track our resource consumption as builders, and we understand the impacts to landscapes and ecosystems, as well as the economies that are created through the opportunities as we map materials and raw materials onto our building, and to produce really great spaces, to try to make light-filled working spaces that have low energy demands, but also potentially store carbon. And then we really began to look at the way in which the very species that we brought into the building envelopes that we were making, into the building structures that we were making, we could track their lifespan, we could track their optimum rotations for harvesting. We could really count how much carbon was stored, not only in the above ground woody matter, but also below soil, within soils below ground, and how to take different products and apply them to different parts of the building and map them on to produce large storage systems, reservoirs of carbon through the different techniques that we use with which to build. And so, for instance, a school in the state in which we live and work and made entirely of industrial CLT and glulam, producing spaces that the students said smell good, which I thought was a really great way to assess architecture, the way it smelled. And then really studying with the students how much carbon could be stored in the building and how much would be emitted in the processing of the material, and learning that material density, especially if you could think about it in terms of storage and photosynthetic manufacturing activity, in this small building we were able to store 100 years worth of auto emissions, and those would stay there as long as the life of the building. But the important thing here is that we're not just talking about material density, we have to talk about urban density as well, because we're facing this onslaught of building to build for 2.3 billion new urban inhabitants in the next 30 years. And it became really noticeable to us that the more efficient harvesting and renewal rates of timber production produced in America, at least, these very high impact morphologies of housing, sprawl, suburban sprawl, which is a really low use of wood, 1-story, 2-story buildings spread across the landscape with all the attenuated infrastructures required at highways and transmission lines and their constant repair, which would mean that no matter how much carbon you stored in suburbia, you're offsetting with enormous loads due to the infrastructural requirements. And meanwhile, these high intensity, high impact material classes like steel and concrete were producing rather efficient morphologies, high-rise buildings which could share building envelopes and infrastructure, share mechanical systems. It seemed to us that it was kind of an irony. And then the question is, do we really just want to figure out how to make really tall timber buildings? And I would say no. I think the bulk of what we face right now is how to build moderately scaled, convivially scaled cities, what we might call a mid-rise city. The highest would be a sort of Barcelona exemple. And so how do we break this relationship between industrial products using fossil hydrocarbon energy systems, using extracted mineral products that have great impact, have very little likelihood of being fully decarbonized, and take this natural manufacturing system using photosynthesis and photosynthetic energy to produce now suburbia? How do we break that relationship between these two sectoral activities? And we propose to do it through regional systems. And so we began through our Timber City Research Initiative to look at the ways in which a forest woodshed, a regional forest woodshed, could supply the demands of a city. A working forest on the right of a certain acreage, a small city district with a specific building demand, studying how the different stand successions could produce a rate of wood below replacement rate, and then to produce a topology of timber buildings, engineering them and studying exactly how much time it would take to produce a city using the natural growth and mortality of a forest land in a certain area. And we found pretty quickly that through the preservation of the reserve forests that we left intact in these areas, the renewed sequestration potential, the reabsorption of carbon as these new forests regrew, the storage of this carbon in the built environment, in the city, and the substitution benefits of not using steel and concrete created an enormous opportunity, which could be monetized if we could start to give carbon credits to builders using bio-based materials, just like we give carbon credits to forest landowners. And so we started to work in the city to apply these systems to first historic buildings, rooftop structures where we were creating greater density without having to reinforce the buildings because of these stiff systems, tall elevator shafts going into these unreinforced masonry structures to add almost doubling the density of the building, and also creating deeply affordable housing in our city of New Haven, a new mass timber project that was currently under construction. And this whole thing really comes out of an idea that with some colleagues and interdisciplinary teams of writers, we wrote a paper called Buildings to the Global Carbon Sink, and we really started to look at the way in which forest cycles could produce a certain amount of carbon benefit, but it was a rather steady state system. But if we could peel off in a sustainable way the material from these growing and dying forests and start to apply them in dense configurations to the city, that, as you can see, we could start to actually collect carbon and store it, like a pump that keeps producing water. And so the comparison we found very quickly was that we could actually continue as business as usual, build the way we do with wood and with steel and concrete, and emit our 71 gigatons, or we could actually reverse climate change and store 75 gigatons in total if we take into account substitution. And so, because I'm coming to the end, I'll stop here and simply say the question for all of us is this. If we use ecological silvicultural techniques, where we really study the way that the forest grows and repairs itself and expands, we can take this 68 to 70 gigatons of carbon produced by human activity, as represented by this sort of light map of human density, and we can turn it into an incentive to grow all of the forests and take advantage of all of the forest potential that we see globally. And that's the strategy of the biomass scenario. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aaron. You missed those applause, but they were. So maybe a couple of questions if you have. Yes. Could you maybe come here? Yes, I think it's better. Thank you so much. Wij zijn zo lang over dit. You can address directly to Aaron.
So just one question. So you talked about CRT, and I was wondering if in your work you think about a way of not using CRT, it's just glue, or do you think it's a nonsense because glue in the end is like just a little effect on the global thing? So that's my question. Thank you.
Tell me when you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. That's a fantastic question, and I think it's a hotly debated. I think the manufacturers would tell you that the efficiency of the use of glue is so insignificant compared to the smelting of steel or the sintering of Portland cement that we shouldn't, throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I would say that actually, if we really consider life cycle benefits, if we have a bunch of plastics that are part of the glue, the structural timbers that we make, and the idea of the waste hierarchy is to return ultimately these fibers to soil to create healthy soil systems, then I think we want to do everything we can to eradicate the use of petrochemical adhesives. And I'll let the experts really speak about that next. But I would say that there are really interesting mechanical techniques that we can take advantage of. I think glulam and CLT are a transitional technology, and I hope we can do a really good job to change to new systems of using wood, but not relying on enormous solid wood sections. So lignin-based adhesives, different things that may seem like a real challenge now, I think are what we want to look for.
Thank you for your answer. Is there another question before giving the word to Andrea?
Don't be shy. I have another one. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, it's again me. You talked about carbon credits. did you guys have carbon credit in USA? Because actually we talked a lot about it in France for a few years, but we don't have it for the moment. So what's the situation in USA?
We are hoping and working on pilots to get built construction stored carbon its rightful place in offsets. I would say this, that it's been discussed. We've been thinking about it for close to 10 years now, and trying to show that we can actually weigh buildings and know exactly how much carbon is stored in them. We can debate how much is emitted along the way. There's obviously a lot of imprecision for a whole bunch of reasons in measuring production emissions, but we can say how much carbon exists in a building. And we have more finer and finer, more precise methods of really assessing that. That being said, I would say the carbon credit market right now is really got a bad stink on it, to use an American expression, because it's been really misused and misapplied, and I think it's a very challenging thing to do. So we're right now working in Bhutan, actually, to develop a pilot program for systemic carbon savings, that is in the forest and production of buildings, in the protection of existing buildings, which have a lot of embodied carbon in them, and also potential storage of carbon. But one of the things I want to mention about this carbon, construction stored carbon, is that we don't really have good scenarios for the reuse of wood at the end of the building life cycle. And so it's really important that architects develop scenarios not only for the design, assembly, and disassembly of their buildings, but beyond, proposals for how those components will be reused as future, hopefully in building, but maybe cascading down into less durable consumer products. So I guess what I'm saying is there's a lot of agency and capacity that we have to make changes around understanding this life cycle design approach and really proposing new ways that wood can be considered more than just simply carbon neutral across the building life cycle. And that one of the ways that would be incentivized is by giving a developer, say, credit for using wood, but making sure that they guarantee that wood will stay in durable consumer products at least over multiple life cycles.
Well, if I just add to that, actually on the French level, we have the bâti, the certificate, which actually is eligible also for new construction and other things. And on the European level, the European Commission is currently working on the carbon removal regulation, so to say, which will probably, I think, be published, or actually the first draft of the working document should be published and will be discussed and debated. And as Alan perfectly said, unfortunately, got the wrong direction, I would call it, and also a wrong discussion around it. But actually, there are a lot of very good initiatives and first certificates and also things that clearly promote our sector. And France actually is leading that with this bâtiment bas carbone and the certificate.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anne. So we will hear Andreja, and we put your presentation.
Can you share that Alan can see it?
I think so, yes.
Alan, can you see it then?
I think it will work.
Good. It's fine.
Thank you, and I think that Alan made a very nice introduction to my talk. I was thinking what to focus on, and then I thought maybe it's more about what is your task for the future, because it's actually you who are going to be the future leaders, and I would like to give you a bit of a thought. What I believe it's important that we focus on together, and of course a bit also the activities that we are doing. So I hope that it will initiate some brainstorming what we can do together, or that you also provide feedback to us, what we should focus on, what is in your opinion the need for it. I entitled my presentation as Traditional Woodworking Skills and Advanced Technologies for the New European Bauhaus. And first I will ask this, do everyone know what the New European Bauhaus is?
Not really. If you could precise.
I can do it in a really short, very short way. So New European Bauhaus is an initiative of European Commission to actually support the activities that we will be achieving the targets of a Green Deal. And the idea was created in the Bauhaus, in Berlin, in the old Bauhaus, the traditional Bauhaus, that was about rebuilding Europe and Germany, obviously. And now what we need to do is we need to again rebuild, actually, Europe, but this time because of the climate change that we are having. And the concept of New European Bauhaus is that we are doing it in a sustainable way, that we are doing it inclusively, so together, different actors, and that we are including the beauty or the cultural actors in this. So I hope that I presented it in simple enough terms, but the reasons why we need it, why we need to rebuild our planet, Alan already gave a really nice introduction, so I don't need to go into the climate crisis and the paper in nature. That is actually something that should be reminding us constantly why we are talking about the wood and other renewable materials to be used in the built environment, where we have so many emissions that are caused. And built environment today is like a complex structure that probably completely we will not be able to replace the very harmful materials. But I would like to direct you to colleagues in Denmark that made a really nice pyramid of the materials and what kind of environmental impacts they're having. And obviously our, if I say so, our material is carbon negative and climate negative, which means that we should be trying to innovate and try to use it as much as possible. And today, we are not having all solutions yet available that we should have, that we can be actually replacing the materials that are above the zero and are currently used in the built environment. But it's not only about the climate, but there is another reason. And if I ask you, where would you rather be? In the upper picture or the lower one? Where? Upper or lower? Okay, the lower one. Yes, as it is here, so beautiful in the middle of the Alps. And why we are doing so well here? It's because it's natural environment. And today the cities and Tokyo that was shown to us by Alan is something that is not a natural material. But there is a fact that we spend 80% and in certain cases even more indoors. And if I ask you again, in which building you would rather be, left or right? So wood is actually a material that is enabling us that we bring nature indoors. And this is a topic that we could discuss extensively, and also Alan could be talking a lot about the regenerative designs and biophilic designs that you might. How many of you are studying architecture? Yeah. And the rest?
Also actors, but we finished studies.
Oh, you finished already the study, so then you are already architects. Well, even better, so wonderful. So I guess this would be, now I need to be careful that I didn't have to talk about too much about the architecture, that you say it's not your field, but what I want to emphasize is that the studies that we did is that actually the natural materials and as good are having positive impacts on us. And by bringing them indoors, we actually are again creating the buildings for humans, which was in the last years when we really focused on the climate change and energy efficiency and the buildings. We forgot that we make them for us, for people. And therefore, it's so important that we bring the human person back into the center and we actually create a built environment that is meant for us and that is natural, because that's how we were actually developed in nature, and that's how it should be also in the future. But of course, we have a huge challenge, especially in Europe, because it's not only the new build. We can of course make wonderful new buildings that we also know how we will demolish and reuse the materials, do the design for disassembly. But we have also very big old building stock that should be also renovated, and we should find solutions how to bring wood and other renewables in the renovation and reconstruction of this old and cultural heritage that we have in Europe in considerable amounts. And we of course should be concerned for the future. And you are the ones that needs to support us in finding the solutions how we are going to do this. And so just to go back to wood, natural material, really want to emphasize is that it's not only about the climate, it's also about the society, us, and we need to think about it that we are to be living in nature. And unfortunately, our lifestyles are such that we spend so much time indoors. But how to now make these buildings? And in the past, we have been thinking long term, and when we planted the trees, we already were thinking what they will be used for. And here is an example from a colleague of mine who was studying the history of Istria. He shared this with me, that there was instructions how to prune the trees depending on which part of a Venetian navy that tree should be used for. Today, we don't do that anymore. We are like so fast, and then we are like trying with the different engineered composites to create the functionality that we needed, or we engineer, we do the engineering of materials. I would like to remind you about this slide in terms of yes, it used to be different. Today we do not have time for this. However, due to the fact that we will have to plant trees, and we will have to be thinking of how we will be preserving the forest as well, having more of them because we need more of it in order to save the planet. Maybe we need to connect very closely with the foresters who can support us, and we can actually be also looking into the aspect of thinking beyond just using the material that is available at our doors. Wood is very, very complex material, and majority of people are understanding it on the tree, log, and board level, but many of you studying the materials and the wood science, you understand it much deeper down. And in order to innovate, in order to actually create new engineered products that we can use in the built environment, we do need to go down on a nano scale and really understand it. And there is an additional challenge, which is that there are two trees that are the same. This depends where it is growing, and of course the species. And so that the challenge becomes enormous. And we need to be aware of this. We need to be aware that the material that we are having requires deep understanding. And there is many different products that are already on the market, and we are actually utilizing them in different products. And I will not go and list all of them, but I think that we are all aware where the issues are, and this is the resource efficiency, this is the physics, and in order to actually make the innovations, we need to be actually thinking of how to use the wood even without a fossil base. The physics, plastic, metal, all of this is today used in the products that we use. But additional challenge that we have is that the feedstock is changing, and we need to learn how to also utilize broadleaves, especially in construction. If we focus on the construction, that we might need to utilize younger trees because of the short rotation and plantations and all of these that we have to focus on. But in order to do this, in my strong belief, the only way that we bring the solutions are the interdisciplinary approaches. So we need to be connecting, we need to be discussing what is the needed performance and how we can be actually utilizing the material, and of course at the same time thinking that how we are going to be reusing it as long as possible. One quite developed field of the use of different types of wood also for purposes that originally, if I say so, are not used for is wood modification. We know many different treatments. I need to also honestly say that many of the treatments are also not all that nice to the environment, but still, when we are understanding the material on a micro and nano level, we can actually change it and deliver to the users or architects the intended properties that we need. I personally am doing the research on the wood modification field in wood densification, which is part of the thermally based modification, and there is really a lot of these different treatments that each of them can be a course on its own, so that's not my intention now to go into the details, but I would like to share with you one example, and this is the densified wood that we developed a process together with the Austrian company Lengefeld that is enabling densification of wood that is very dimensionally stable, and we are currently looking into commercialization of the process that is available. But since I am speaking a lot and I have still quite a few slides, I will run through the main message further, and this is that the world is changing, and also the wood education needs to be changing. It's not only about the chemistry, physics, and all I was emphasizing in terms of knowing the material, but we need to be also incorporating sustainability, digitalization, internationalization, social sciences, and of course, creativity. That is one of the important aspects. And of course, we do need potentially also different types of skills. The fact is that today the young people, the ones that will be entering into the field of wood science, they are different than what we were years ago, and we need to be adopting our educational programs. And what is my ambition, that when we are doing this together, hopefully, that we are going to create the recognized global leaders in the field of circular economy and the built environment that is actually saving our planet. And that it's not only the new ones, but also it's important that we still the current actors in the construction ecosystem. And in the frame of this, at the University of Primorska, we established European Bauhaus Academy Pioneer Hub for Sustainable Built Environment with Renewable Materials, and it's initiated through the initiative of our European Bauhaus that I earlier mentioned, but our ambition is that we accelerate the transfer and adoption of a climate change mitigation knowledge, and that we decarbonize the building stock that is currently available and the one that we are creating. Different topics that we are doing the trainings on, and for different stakeholders, going from the materials to digitalization to circular economy, cultural heritage, a very important aspect. And I would like to ask you to support us in obtaining data on what kind of gaps are currently today in the society, in knowledge, in order to actually increase the use of renewable materials in sustainable built environment. We are having an online survey that is implemented in 17 different languages, and we hope that with obtaining a lot of responses, we will be really able to define the needed training materials. And just for one last thing, and since Andreas will continue after me, I would like to share with you also my thought and advice to you that when you have ideas, something needs to happen. It's always important to involve to a certain extent also the policy. And therefore, I would like to encourage you that you are active in this regard as well. And in the wood sector, we created so-called Wood for Bauhaus Alliance that we are aiming to be the place to go for the policy that wants to understand what are the policy changes that need to happen in order to actually be achieving the decarbonization of a building stock. And with that, I will complete, and I hope I wasn't too long, but so if I was, yeah.
Sorry. I think someone could maybe help me to express myself. But yesterday we were talking about French policies, about how to quelqu'un peut m'aider. Peut-être quelqu'un peut traduire ma question. Hier, par exemple, on a vu que le gouvernement a fait des recommandations par rapport à la gestion forestière. C'est complété ma pensée. Et en fait, on a vu qu'entre le texte de loi et finalement
un peu plus fort, s'il vous plaît, parce que vous avez dit quoi?
So between the policy recommendations from forestry officers and the text of the law that's actually passed, there was a large gap between them, and the government did not follow the recommendations of the scientific community. And
so how can you guarantee this? Also, I guess that maybe we should have some juridical tools, or also.
So what are there tools that we can use?
So if I understand correctly, one thing is that you are worried that the policy is making the rules without the knowledge and then makes a mess. And it's a rule that doesn't have sense.
It's not only worried, it's a fact.
Yeah.
Ça veut dire qu'il y a franchement pas un connexion entre le savoir-faire aussi entre la forêt et le.
The fact is, like in 2020, someone has written like several rules and objectives.
So, for example, the Forestry Office, National Office of Forestry, made a recommendation that at least 25% of the forest should be maintained as full growth in order to protect the long-term health of the forest. And then the policies that were decided and written into law not only ignored the recommendations of the scientific community and the forest management, but also went in complete contradiction. So I think Alice's question is, how do we negotiate these?
Yes, it wasn't respected, so how can we really...
So what would be my recommendation how to approach this is that you can come to the Wood for Bauhaus Alliance and you share your thought and you say, well, we really want to somehow change this. And then there is a lot of networks of policy making in the area of the wood and forestry sector. And we, for example, have a project, WoodPop, that is a project on policy development that was initiated between Austria and Finland, and now different countries are joining this policy making. That the ambition is that this time it should not be happening, and that they can actually unite on the European level. And Slovenia is actually coordinating the policy development on the topic of the training and education in the wood sector. So I would say, we call it white paper, but you share it with us, Andreas will help, we will polish it, and believe me, there is quite a huge chance that this can be heard afterwards.
So what are the specific recommendations, policy recommendations of the Institute?
So there is there's of course different aspects that exist, and in Slovenia, for example, our institute developed an action plan that how to actually boost the wood sector in the country, which includes how to include the wood-related practice in the elementary school in order to bring it closer to the society. Then we have to have a tax reform, that the wooden product will be taxed less, that the wood processing companies would have lower profit tax, and also that they can be actually kind of being supported in this regard, that they would be also the society deciding for them to buy, to purchase. Then, of course, there is subsidies that should be developed in different member states, but there are things also on a European and global level, and this is was last week, I think, announced how it's going to be needed, that for every board that you will be importing, it will have to have information from where it came from. So it's something that it's coming, and this is now, of course, it's the policy made it. Do we have solution how to achieve this and actually deliver it? Well, the fact is, no, we have a huge project running currently that we are developing this, that you will be able to track it. So there are different of these levels, and what I would like to also say is that we established Shidorenew, the institute I'm running in 2017, and if you would ask me at that time that the President of the European Commission will in her speeches talk about wood, I would say you're crazy, this will never happen. Today, or it also already happened in 2020, when she gave a speech and it was all about wood, and I was like, no way, what happened? But actually our activities, and I think Andreas is quite an actor on the field, is actually at the end we realize, that's what we have in Europe, and that's what we need to support. And then of course it goes into green public procurement, for example, that's also policy development. And in Slovenia, what we are able to achieve is that if you build a building with the public money, we need to have at least 30% volume-wise of wood in the building. So that is something that we were able to deliver. Right.
In your presentation, you asked us where would we rather be, in the city or in the forest. And I'm wondering now, why do we spend time, or maybe why do you spend time building nice buildings, and rather than getting people out in the forest, actually, because you also said we spend 80 to 90% indoors, why don't we try to lower that percentage? And I don't know.
It's a very wonderful thought, and unfortunately our lifestyle is such that well, no one actually wants to work on the farms, to be or in the forest. It's hard, you know, because it's also intensive work, and it's everything is moved indoors, and that's the fact of how we live today. You know, we don't go just easily to a shelter, which was in the past, but we actually do our activities. We step up to go to the fitness, you know. It's just a lifestyle.
Yes, I have just a small question about the use of energy to optimize inception, because the majority of formaldehyde is really highly toxic for humans, so life.
Yeah, so the formaldehyde is actually one topic that is very known, I would say, by the construction ecosystem, if I say so. The fact is that even natural wood has formaldehyde. And the levels that went into the regulations, how much of the formaldehyde adhesives can have, went so low that if they go any lower, we have an issue because we won't be able to use wood, because we have so much formaldehyde there as well. And currently, it's actually a big fight of the panel industry for melamine, because that is to be banned in Europe to be produced.
There were two questions.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's really a question. It's just to have something to what was to say, because it's I had the same thought, and related to when you told us about the people who learn how to prune the tree to make the Venetian loads, maybe. I just told myself, maybe I would rather prefer to learn that rather than being in front of a computer and inventing new things. So yeah, just to have something. But I know that you already listen to the it's definitely.
Yeah, a very good comment, and it's something that, you know, when you think about it, it's like, you're so stupid now, why you don't do that? You know, the solution is there already, but the knowledge also was lost, in my opinion. You know,
Yeah, just one question. Alan spoke about the fact that if you want to respect the amount of carbon, maximum amount of carbon we have to have in the atmosphere now, we have to build wood to stock a lot of carbon. And do you guys have initiative in your country about fibers? Because we talked a lot about wood, but there is a problem with wood. One of it is that it stocks CO2, but not so much. And the second question is it's because the amount of wood we have to use to replace the concrete we are actually using is going to create like a huge stress on all the forests we have, and with the climate change, even if we decide to plant more, well, it's it's not.
I understand what you are saying, and I completely agree with you. Mass timber obviously could be used when it should be used, while single-family houses, 2-3 floors, we can do with a timber frame, where we can use way less wood, and we can use also wood in different forms, like fibers, you know, that, and we are way more resource efficient, and this is something that we are, of course, aware that what can happen, that we are educating the policy, it's carbon storage, we need to give the credits, And at the same time, we know that it can be that it will be wrongly used because it's going to be encourage people to be using the cross-laminated timber instead of a resource-efficient solution. Of course, mass timber is enabling us that we go and replace concrete because we can go also very high and we store a lot of carbon, but we should not be forgetting that we should be efficiently using the resource that we have. So,
and is the new European Bauhaus concept integrating also all the fibers like straw or others
yes,
things, or it is about only wood?
No, it's bio-based materials, and first they used the word wood, but then there were like a lot of lobbying and screaming why only wood, and then they decided for bio-based. I intend to use renewable materials in my talks, so we could debate, but the fact is that wood is the amongst the most important one in Europe. Last question is
Okay. Can we draw any lesson from European policies on organic farming to not repeat the same mistakes or things that haven't been solved? I mean, do you know if there is like some critical studies on that? Because now we think I don't know, but like organic farming is like there is like some little controversy. So maybe it's the same kind of trend, and yeah.
I must say that I don't know it to the extent that I could really comment on this. Maybe Andreas can help me with the organic part, and that's the introduction to this.
I'm a farmer now. Voulez-vous faire une petite pause de 5 minutes?
Non,
Non.
Non, est-ce que vous voulez faire une pause en français? Parce que Andreas, il peut parler français.
Non.
Non, c'est en anglais. Ok.
Oui, je veux aussi vous donner des questions, c'est aussi possible de faire en français, finnois ou allemand, comme vous voulez. Voilà. So good afternoon, it's really a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation. And as Andrea has kindly introduced me, I should say, organic farming, a symbol, a model, probably conflicts going to the forest-based sector. Yes or no, and what I put as a title related when I looked in the program is the forest as a source, and I was like, no, the forest is the source, education, training for boosting the green transition, and with the circular bioeconomy concept at large. And I put here just that you understand, because I'm not I'm hardly in research, but I have my whole career track was really like on European scale. So I started 2002. They asked me actually, and I just was thrown into the cold water to develop transnational research innovation programs. And I was in Brussels to develop a technology platform. I met Andrea at that time. She was much younger even than today, and so everything was developing. I'm still involved in these things. Kind of, you can look at me kind of like a great eminence for the forest-based sector related to these issues. And this is also what my company is called, Homo Silvestris Europaea, just to say we're the European forest-based people, forest people. Also, as you can use it in Latin for wood. So I'm very grateful, Alan. Thank you so much, and Andrea, for your speeches, because we know each other. I was thinking I'd do something a little bit more radical with you. This is some images that's coming from, they talk about wood and architecture, wood research. That's the field of expertise. I'm a trained forest and wood scientist myself. I have both paths. And here you see some images about forest education. That's a traditional way how you learn forestry. It's like you start with the basic things like botany, zoology, soil sciences, hydrology, meteorology, pathology. You go into vegetation sciences, then you go further. Next level is the forest management, then the next level of pathology, dealing with forest fires or other abiotic incidents that can happen in the forest. And so you do forest management, organizational structure, forest or wood markets, and so on, traditional. You see it here, you have also, and that's a very good question, if you allow me just to get to the problem in organic farming, forest policy. Why don't we have the problems on the national level and on the European level? Because the European Union started with the Treaty of Rome, L'accord de Rome, and the forestry is exclusively not mentioned. This is related to ownership types, because we have this called the subsidiarity principle, and actually this is something where I swirl around for 25 years, I would say, dealing with all these issues in the daily work. That means on the European level we do not have a common European forest policy, but, and this is not complicating everything, for everything that's environmental related, like climate change impacts, biodiversity, and whatever it takes, the European Commission has the mandate to develop strategies and policies. And forestry, of course, takes part of the nature and of the environment. That makes it sometimes very complicated because on national level we're usually dealing with the Ministry for Agriculture. Sometimes there are ministries in countries like Finland directly dedicated to forestry. But that makes it really like a super circus of policy development and things. So that complicates the whole thing. But at the same time, never forget our sector in Europe. We only have 7% of the forest surface worldwide, but we are producing 35% of all the wood products or forest-based products worldwide. It shows you already how well we are advanced, how efficient we are, and that innovation is driving our sector. I like very much that you put OSD into your presentation. OSD-oriented strand board is one of the most innovative materials, knowledge-based. People look at this as it's sort of like just a piece of wood. It's not. You really have to understand what wood is, how it's functioning, that you're able to produce such a great board. And there are many, many other examples. So it's really like very creative, and it's also very important to really understand and dig into the knowledge. I'm presenting you something that probably you think has nothing to do with you or with education training. It's the opposite. The Spice Girls are not there because I like the music. The Spice Girls are a symbol for girl power. That's a slogan, it's true. There are even some studies saying the Spice Girls probably have, pushed much further the identification of the women's movement than, for example, some of those what we would call like women's rights movement, feminist demonstrations. But the future is female. I'm so happy to see how many women are in the room right now. When I studied forestry, we were the first year with 35% women studying with us, and the years before there were like 2 out of 100. So I was lucky, I was already the first, and today it's around, it's swirling around. Why do I show that? Because you work differently. And it's important also in the way how we construct our new living together. The society will change. The way we will look at products will change. The way we use things will change. For the good, for the better, sometimes we have to find compromises. But it's a very important market and also aspect in the educational system. The second thing I put in here, you all know, SIDA, AIDS, it was in the 80s. We all went through the last 3 years a huge worldwide pandemic. I'm a generation who already went through one. It was in the 80s, it was HIV, it was AIDS. I think most of you are probably too young to remember. I've only heard of it. It was coming in 2 years. 36 million people died until today on HIV, on AIDS, or AIDS complicated related diseases. We still estimate 36 to 40 million people who are HIV positive. Research plays a key role, and also the societal aspect. Does any one of you know how it changed? Well, you're really too young. Sorry. Rock Hudson, the famous Hollywood actor, came out as being AIDS, dying on AIDS, diagnosed AIDS, HIV positive, being homosexual. That was the first time Ronald Reagan could not refuse not to talk about it. Elizabeth Taylor started the first fundraising Elton John. It created a huge fund for research, and there's a breakthrough that since the mid of the 90s, research has developed treatments for those who are HIV positive today, and they get treatment that will live as if they have no AIDS. That's research. And it's really efforts in collaboration. It was Institut Pasteur, first one to identify the virus and could detect it, but then it was international collaboration that made it possible to develop the treatment. We see climate change impacts. We live in a time with a lot of uncertainties, disruptive management, disruptive lifestyles, which we all will face, and this will be the case. And if we want or not, we see the right wing and some even left wing radicals saying like, we want to stay in our region or country. It's not possible, we're in one world. What happens here has an effect everywhere, we know this, and we are connected. I see you all with your smartphones, we are all connected worldwide. One click, we're in Indonesia, one click, we're in Europe, one click, we're in New Zealand. We get everywhere. And this is also something which is quite important. We talk now about artificial intelligence, what will this mean, what will change. We have to take this into consideration and be aware of new diseases, new pandemic things will pop up. 50% of the European population will develop cancer. It's not a good sign, but it's because we're getting so old. And the majority will survive, will not even have huge problems. But 50% will develop cancer. Latest studies from German RKI. And that's very important also. But due to the situation today, it's not a death threat immediately. This is part also when you start thinking about when you work. You think about what does it mean if I can, as an architect, I have to build something. What does it mean if it's mixed in terms of light? Taking this kind of developments into consideration, not only thinking of applying already eco-design, reuse, recycling aspects of the materials and the building itself, but how does it serve, and how can it serve in the next 20 to 30 years. When you do educational programs, as I said, we're here today. You are all there. You're digital natives, you're young, you're intelligent, you're connected. We still sometimes have to learn. I started with the Unix computer you probably have never heard of, and I know still the Commodore 64. You could use cassettes, which you do not now tapes, where we could program and store it. I put in here a lot of things what we're seeing globally. Why is it important for us? We cannot only look at the region, France or Europe. We have to see what's happening somewhere else. Europe is still patriarchic. I put this classical, like me, male manager kind of guy running around, but we're aging very fast now. We're the most aging population worldwide. And you see here two female representatives of a new generation, what we see. Unfortunately, the left one has died, Vivian Westwood. She was an art teacher at primary school, and she was revolutionizing the fashion world when punk. She created punk, the look of punk. She created offers, amazing collections. She worked with materials. She was the first one in the fashion world saying we have to be sustainable, we have to reuse, we have to think of new materials that we can apply. As I said, we become more diverse. We have to think about it. What does it mean? We have huge migration movement around the world. How do we make the new concepts or living, working? What does it mean if I hire people coming from other parts of the world? They want to go back, see their families more regularly. How can I organize it that they feel at home, that they feel welcome? How do we organize our life that is changing rapidly? And last but not least, gentlemen, you're changing as well. We see, thank God, I'm really grateful for this, also for the Me Too movement. Men are changing in the way they're taking much more care as parents. Parenthood is changing. That means also the lifestyle and the sharing of work, of housework, and so starts. And I'm very happy to see that in the younger generation, you're much more open-minded to discuss that, and also really to advance. Why is this important? I put you here a graphic that has been published, I think, last year by the European Commission Services. It's the Innovation Scoreboard, and it's just an indicator that will tell you which member states or countries in Europe are really highly innovative. And you see the first one here, you see the leaders, and it's Sweden, Finland, Norway, it's the Netherlands, it's Belgium. And then if you go to the country, why is this? You have an idea, why are there really leaders? Then invest the highest into educational programs on all levels. Education is key in those countries for innovation, for research, and education is really like key. That's the asset. It has nothing to do with resources. It's nothing to do with investment. It has to do with my battery is full.
No, it's okay.
It's okay. So you see how important this is for an economy and also for a country to advance, to be very well educated on all levels, and to really the real figures is like the others will catch up, but it's really interesting to see these countries have always invested, always modernized the educational system. At the same time, they're leaders in applied research, and they're also at the same time working a lot to have a knowledge-based, highly innovative industry and economy. And it's a permanent process. There's never a stopping. There's never a moment when you say, okay, we achieved, that's great. It's still ongoing. On this slide, I put you, when we talk about the circular bioeconomy, because here we talk about wood and forest, and what is the role of all the different stakeholder groups. And of course, we have the policy decision makers on community level, regional level, national level, European level. They have to understand what is the concept and what kind of policies have to be done that the concept can be realized. We have companies that will have to, they have to rethink their growth model, they have to rethink their economic model, they have to think what potential is there, how can they realize it, do they find new partners, do they do co-production, can they install it in their own production lines. We need new investors, and we see already that a lot of investors are interested in investing in the forest-based sector. The society is aware of, you get this great example about what you see in the policy making. We see that there are studies criticizing a bit organic farming or whatever. That's also political gaming, right? You should be aware this is just normal argumentation. Last but not least, education. Do we educate enough that the people understand the concept? Do we educate well that you immediately know how you can use it, how you can contribute to it? And Andrea talked about this, the European Bauhaus, and I was just give you one figure. It is education training is essential, and there's just a recent study by the Finnish Ministry for Agriculture. This is saying that in the year 2040, which is not very long from today, 2040, 50% of the employees in the bioeconomy will retire. I hope I retire earlier, but let's see. So that means we have to educate, train today, and if we want to grow, that means we have to attract much more people getting into it. It's not enough to replace, but we want to grow it. So it's a huge challenge, and we have collaborated also in the project, and I will afterwards just show you one slide on that. Project that was analyzing the performance of first transformation processes. In brief, that means sawmill industries, panel and board producers, their performance in the concept of the circular economy. And it's really motivating. It's very high. We made analysis all around Europe, and we developed a white paper in the project which is called the Wood Circus. And there's one mapping forum that is fully dedicated to training, education, and research, which we need more and more and more to realize innovations and to boost the concept. Andrea mentioned as well, and I'm happy she's here. I know that they were asked actually at the postdoc to ask that because I'm behind this working with initiative Wood Pop. Pop is a policy platform, and it's only the ministry, it's only public service that is collaborating to have better policies that we do not fall into situations, as you both mentioned very well, you probably have discussed yesterday, if there's a gap between 2 or 3 policies that probably block each other. We need a harmonization of regulations, we need a better harmonization of policies. This is related to the fact when it comes to forestry and wood, the whole work is kind of like addressed, the whole work is involved, and I have 2 minutes left, so you get the slides and you see the Wood Circus. We have published the white paper of the Wood Circus in 10 different national languages, also available in French and even in Basque. We have also regional language because we had Tecnalia and Iguin and Basque group with those from the Basque country. They were more than happy just to have the Basque version also available. read it. You can see this is a direction-giving document that gives you ideas where we have to move if we want to realize the concept of the circular bioeconomy. So the 2 minutes are over and I finished, and thank you very much, and happy to hear any questions. Thank you.
Do you have some more questions?
No, I could.
So one comment actually, because we put this innovation scoreboard on, and we have the Alps, you know, how many countries are they? Austria, Slovenia, Italy, France, and Switzerland, right? And there is only one that is below the average of the innovation scoreboard, and this is actually Slovenia. And this means the European Commission is actually having a huge program of financing that is called for widening countries, because they don't want to say less developed countries, but they say widening. And so it's an interesting aspect that Slovenia is the only one in this Alpine region that actually is below the innovation scoreboard. But besides this investment into the research, it's also about the collaboration. And if they actually count the number of scientific papers that are between the research institutions, academia, and industry and private sector. So it's, of course, the ecosystem or these countries that are high innovators, they're actually exceeding even. They work hands in hand. And so for this region here in the Alps, you are the ones, because some of you will go into academia and some of you will go into industry. You need to support us, you know, in like really working together, which is the aspect also of the new European Bauhaus that we need to be connected.
Yes, please. Aussi en français.
Vous avez beaucoup parlé d'éducation.
Oui.
Est-ce que vous connaissez des programmes qui commencent dès les plus jeunes âges? Enfin, les écoles dans la forêt, les écoles du dehors, ça existe un peu en France, mais pas tout. Mais est-ce que vous connaissez des modèles ou des... Je sais pas.
Oui, I just reply in English. We know that for the forestry part, you have like the vocational training for the forest operators, workers in the forest. This is a bit differently organized in the countries, but it's practically comparable. To attract, let's say, very early young ones, because forest sciences was dedicated to become a public official, public servant in the forest service, and only a small part went to, because in the past, the private forest owners were also managed by the public service. It was a, for free service that has changed, let's say, 20 years ago. And you see also the frictions there. To organize new educational programs and to attract people into this field is starting now with raising awareness about environmental issues, but also to educate people on the real dynamics. I'll give you an example. If you take some species, forests are living ecosystems. And if you identify, for example, in Baden-Württemberg, other side of France, there's an oak tree which is so rare that you can put it on the red list. If you cross the border 50 kilometers, it's abundant. So is it really like an endangered species? If you say, okay, we want more in Baden-Württemberg, maybe yes. Or if you look at the natural habitat, you say no. You do not, I hear very often, I really want to stress, I'm not against protecting parts of the forest or of an area for a certain time. That may be really wise. First of all, I would like to have several areas protected for 5 to 10 years for genetic testing and to get genetic materials, because you need that also for sciences and better understanding what is the impact of climate change effects, what's the impact of the degradation or improvement of soils, and so we need to do that. So for research it's important, but due to the dynamics, you cannot conserve a forest as it is today, because it's growing, it's dying. It's normal. and it's regrowing in different ways at the same time. It's not like you have one forest and this will repeat itself as you see it in the next 300 years. This is the wrong perception about dynamics of nature. And to increase biodiversity, people say you have this natural vegetation or potential natural vegetation. In some potential natural vegetation, you do not have a high biodiversity. It's just beech forest, and it's very low when it's related to biodiversity. But if you manage, you can increase. And it's more complex in terms like working with the soils, because we need to guarantee that we have productive, healthy soils. We need to increase the resilience. We have to understand what are the dynamics, also that we are less vulnerable. You see here, unfortunately, also when you look outside the windows, the bark beetle attack on the spruce trees here. It's an effect that is there. We have to live with this. It's really not what we want. And I do not blame the people who have planted probably those trees 50 or 60 years ago, 80 years. They couldn't know what's happening now. We do not know how the world will look in 20 years. But what we can try to do is to support the dynamics, kind of like in forestry, and to understand. And it's, from my point of view, we should really start a dialogue and really educate people to understand that they just not say, I want to protect this because there's, for example, a certain bat, but the bat is actually migrating through the forest in its population. That's very important to say it makes sense, and as I said, I'm not against for some period of time or for specific purposes, but you can still manage and use a huge part of the forest in a sustainable way, of course not large clear cuts or things like this. It's still providing the wood. You had some questions also, if I understand correctly earlier, saying like, is there enough wood or other things? This is a super question I get many times. I say yes, but. And the but is related less to the wood that's available, but is related to ownership problems, mobilization of ownership, cost of mobilization, logistics. We do not have enough people working. We need anybody who would love also to work in forest operations and everywhere. The problem you see here, the best would be if you have enough people who can take care of and kind of like manage it, but they're simply not there. Where I grew up, it's called the forest corner, Waldeck, and there are parts of my forest, it's heartbreaking for me there. It's gone, totally gone. And I don't blame anybody because we just have not enough capacities of people to manage the whole huge area. That's it. So.
We need to stop burning the woods.
Yeah.
I might have missed something, but I feel like you talk a lot about theoretical education, about the way wood should be managed and people should understand ecosystems and that sort of thing. And I was wondering if you might be able to tell us something about different forms of education as well, beyond sort of very academic number senses, questions, and taking into account questions surrounding the fact that sometimes people find it very difficult to be confronted with that kind of data.
That's a super question. It's very intelligent because it is not. I'm not able to give you an answer for one solution fits all. We have so many diverse. We have 37 different forest types in Europe. That's already stupid to say because then within we have mixes, we have age classes, we have things which are different. Forest is like us. It's like you go to 3 different doctors and they get probably 3 different answers. I'm not blaming them. They all try their best from their point what they understand. We live and work with living ecosystems. And we see today, due to, as I said, disruptive events, it's the first time, well, still far away, but in the Dolomite area between Cortina d'Ampezzo and Belluno, there was the hurricane, how do you say, there was the Vaya, yeah, but it's not very, yeah, it was a tornado, sorry, it was a storm. Within 1 hour, I've seen it myself because I was invited afterwards with several other people to look at it and discuss. 8 million cubic meter of perfect super force was just erased. It's as a huge giant in a beach horror movie would come and redirect just like, and it was best quality if you would use for instruments. But what happened is like the speed and the intensity of the storm was unknown, and the direction was the first time what we know that it came from the southeastern Adriatic area that was unknown before in Italy in the Dolomite area. We see these things. We had. If you probably remember, 2-3 years ago, we had the northern hemisphere where we also had the disastrous fires in Canada. We had 36 degrees temperature in Lapland. It's true, and it's huge danger. There's only one piece of glass somewhere outside that can start a fire. So we were all worried. You really have to go out and really observe everything that nothing disastrous is happening. The question you're saying, and also some of the results from forest research, is, and that was also, the studies against organic farming or whatever. Unfortunately, we should have actually like a group of experts who can really interpret it. What is in the study? What does it mean? Because we know industry sometimes pays studies that probably serve their interest, NGOs pay studies that serve their interest. Every time when the experts who work on the IPCC report for climate change, every time, a couple of weeks after it's published and everybody's using it for their political purposes, all the scientists say, sorry, it's not what we were saying, it's not what we were working on. Every time. And to answer your question, sorry if I don't give you an answer, but I want to assure you, it is sometimes complicated, it's sometimes difficult, and I think we live in a time where there's a tweet and there's an Instagram, but I did it myself also, I have to sometimes, and people are like, oops, I heard that, and then you read, why don't we go back to the time we first let it sink inside us. We find other people to exchange and try to understand more and go back really to a time where there's dialogue and we try to understand with each other what is really happening. And I think that's really, I would love to go back to this period where we exchange and we have a dialogue, we ask the right questions, and as you ask, like, what does it mean? And if you say it's complicated, for some things we can probably provide you with a simplified model that you just understand and immediately tell you, but take into consideration it may change if this is changing.
Thank you very much. Now with Francesco Negro.
Well, thanks. Welcome you all. I'm the last one to speak, so it's kind of easier thanks to the presentations of the other speakers. They introduced some relevant concepts. I will repeat some of them. At first I thought naming my presentation Our World, Our Book. Then I decided to just talk, so I do not have slides to show. My idea is to share with you some of my thoughts, some of my point of views, and I hope to give you something to speak about. So our world, I will start big from the fact that our world is burning. We know that, and the world is burning. It is too hot, we know that. And it's a wonderful world, and it's a world with huge problems at various levels, social levels, economic levels, and environmental levels. And we know that a key issue is climate crisis, and we know that the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is like the engine of global warming and climate crisis. Maybe you're familiar with the curve of concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. has risen since the 50s to unprecedented levels, and it is still rising right now. So, maybe in the 50s our society was not that aware of the importance of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But 20 years ago, we were already well aware of the importance, 20 years ago. And the Kyoto Protocol entered into force in 2005. Or more recently, all the various initiatives related to the road to net zero. We are doing our efforts, we are taking initiatives, and nonetheless, the concentration is still rising right now. So regardless all of our calls, efforts, and so on. And I think that this indicates how huge this problem is, how difficult it is to tackle it, because the concentration of carbon dioxide is so strongly linked to the workings of our society, to how our society is connected, the economic means, the general workings. And to be honest, I am not fully sure that we will be able to invert the trend in time. I hope so, of course. And let's stay positive, let's say that we will be able to invert the trend. Well, to do that, we surely need to take a lead from every possible angle, taking all the strategies, all the possible strategies. So, for instance, considering the energy sources we use, or the way we move our transportation sectors, or our lifestyles, or our production means, and so on, and so on. And among all these comes food. Here comes food, because food can markedly contribute to mitigate, face the climate crisis. Quickly, we know that wood has a high environmental potential. For several reasons, wood is easier to process compared to many other materials, many alternative materials. And being easier to process, it has lower environmental and carbon emissions. Or we know that wood is easier to reuse and recycle, and this is beneficial in terms of life cycle. We know that wood stores carbon, taken directly from the carbon dioxide and fixed in wood. So wood has a lot of environmental values, huge and very important. I am not going to stress here the benefits of wood. I believe here we are all positively oriented towards wood. I want to highlight that wood for sure, wood and wood-based products for sure have very important environmental effect. At the same time, we cannot ask magic to wood. Harry Potter was able to ask magic to wood with his wooden magic wand. We're not. Maybe one day I'll try to cast a spell, but we're not able to ask magic to wood. So the role is very important, it's very valuable, but we have to frame it in a much wider context, a social context, a context that includes all the possible angles, as I said before, starting from the energy sources it uses and so on and so on. Well, that said, the role of wood and wood-based products is fundamental, is highly valuable, and this is why wood is being promoted more and more and more in almost any sector. Building sector, in the sector you want, the wood is being promoted at an unprecedented level, and level is of course. And here I want to highlight that it is not fully our choice whether to use wood or not. It is partly our choice. We can use wood in certain situations, we can choose use it a bit more, a bit less, but to a large extent we cannot avoid using wood. We are forced to use wood. Think about the European production of wood-based panels Well, every year in Europe, around 60 million of cubic meters of wood-based panels, plywood, OSB, particle board, 60 million of cubic meters per year are produced in Europe. That's huge, that's impressive. At times I wonder where all this wood goes. And if we are not to use wood, what we need these products, these panels. Do we have an alternative? Can we use another material? And even if we can substitute this amount of panels, how much higher would the environmental impacts be? And this in a world that is already burning. So as you see, to a large extent, we have to use wood. We cannot avoid using wood. And so the point is how to use it wisely, in a correct way, how to take advantage of all the benefits that wood can give to us. And I'm going to point out just 3 or 4 points, just to mention them. For sure, a key element is choosing the correct wood species, considering the relative applications. Wood is a highly variable material. If you consider density varies by a factor of 10, considering the lightest and heaviest wood species, maybe even more. And so it's like having different materials. And this variability is regards any aspect of wood, any property of wood you consider, for instance, bending strength or durability or appearance. And so choosing the correct wood species is surely a key element for using wood properly. Then the same considerations apply, similar considerations apply to the wood products we use. We can go from solid timber to engineered wood-based products, blue-laminated timber, cross-laminated zinc timber, and so on. So we have to consider that the product in relation to the use. And we can also modify timber wood. Andrea already mentioned that. There are several ways to make wood more suited to our needs: densification, chemical treatment, thermal treatment, and so on. Also, I want to highlight that wood is less forgiving than other materials. So in many applications, we have to take care of the details. Well, details are important for every final application and for any material. But in case of wood, since wood is less forgiving than other materials, we have sound, proper structures, proper products. We have to take care of the details. And so on. I will mention that a proper design from the very beginning considers the recycle and reuse, so considers the life cycle and so on. I also want to mention that a wise way to use wood is not using wood at all. Because nowadays there's a very strong push towards wood, and of course I'm a fan of wood, but there are cases in which wood is not the most suited material. And so in that case, we do not have to overdo that. There's already enough space for using wood. To sum it up, how we can optimize wood and wood-based products, how we can valorize them. I like to cite a famous sentence from Seneca. Maybe someone here has a philosophical background. Seneca said that we cannot direct the wind, but we can adjust the sails. That's a nice sentence, I like it. I think it applies to many situations in our life. It happens to face something that is bigger than us, so we have to adjust. And the same is with wood. We cannot control wood from the very beginning. Wood is made by nature, so it is not made as we want from the very beginning. It has a lot of pros, it has some cons, and so we cannot control it, but we can adjust the sails. We can use it in a proper way. How? By choosing the species, by choosing the products, by modifying it, by taking care of the details, and so on. And by adjusting the sales, well, we are able to navigate along ways. And that's a nice way to see how we work, we deal with wood and wood-based products. Well, that's kind of the big picture, to give you some elements, very basic and very general elements to think about. Of course, this framework is so important, so relevant, then it applies to our researches, studies, jobs, and so on. In my case, I started to work more and more over the years with wood and with wood in terms of sustainability. And well, just to mention some examples, recently we performed a study on the development of Organschi board made with sweet chestnut wood. In Italy, sweet chestnut is a relevant forest resource, and so we tried to develop this product. The results are quite promising, but the point is that it was a technical study, and the trigger was valorizing our resources and finding a product that can give a longer carbon storage compared to alternative uses of sweet chestnut. Or another example, we studied, we compared the structural rating of solid timber beams, large beams. We compared the visual and the machine rating to see the optimization levels. And again, this is a technical aspect, but the trigger was valorizing the natural wood and resources to make wood timber able to make timber suited to the modern needs of the construction sector, and also in this way to unlock the environmental potential of solid timber, because solid timber has a very low environmental impact. Of course, it comes from legal and sustainably managed forests, but it has a very low environmental impact, also because it does not contain glue. The first example refers to developing new products for meeting the new needs in terms of sustainability. This example refers to optimizing what we have to meet the needs in sustainability. And final example, some years ago I studied, we calculated the amount of carbon stored by refurbishing in an apartment taken as a case study. And so this is a third way to work on that, so the knowledge. Having the knowledge, having the numbers to understand the dynamics, to develop policies, and so on. So this is to say that there are several ways by which the general global framework then can really apply to our works and activities. 5 minutes, maybe 4 now. 3 minutes. Okay, I have to finish. I'm going to end with 2 considerations. First one, I like this environment in which we are now. We all say that a multidisciplinary approach is needed. So here we have people from forestry, engineering, social sciences, architecture, and so on. That's what is needed. And it's nice to be in touch. Talking about networking, I want to say that next year I am a member of the International Society of Good Science and Technology. It's an exciting environment in which we can share ideas, researches, and so on. So next year convention will be in Slovenia at Andreja's home. And so you can find information online easily, so please consider attending. It's not that far from here, and maybe we will see each other then. So this to say that networking, collaborating is for sure, from this multidisciplinary approach is for sure valuable. And finally, a final personal consideration. I am not glad, of course, that we are suffering the climate crisis. I am glad, though, that by dealing with wood, I am able to work, to contribute from a small part, to contribute to a such key topic for our society. When I choose wood after my master's degree, some years ago, when I choose wood, well, sustainability was a minor reason. I choose wood because it's a charming material, the forest provenance, the mechanical properties, the products, the uses. And then year after year after year, sustainability started to be more important, and I started to deal more and more with wood in terms of sustainability. And this is kind of a gift that wood is making to me and to all of us working with it, studying it. And I do not want to waste this opportunity, this gift. I intend to work more on wood and sustainability, and I really encourage you to do the same. We really need people working to face the climate crisis and these key issues we are talking about. Thank
you very much. Just I had
I would just like to add that first of impressive speech, super, thank you so much. And you mentioned it, and I would underline again, I do not understand how can the society expect forestry and wood to provide all the solutions to climate change. We are an important player, but the others have to do their homework and have to do their efforts as well. It cannot be the role of forest and wood just to solve all the problems in the world, but they can learn with us and they can learn from us and we can learn from them. But I think this is the message which I already start speaking out loud to politicians and to the commission, that it cannot be that everybody says, okay, it has to be forest and wood. We are important, we take our responsibility, we do what we can, but we cannot solve everything.
I fully agree, and yes, because nowadays the problem is so large, so huge, that it's not more enough to think that one solution, one point of view.
Yeah.
Maybe it was that way some years ago. I fully agree, and it's not realistic, and it's also dangerous because it can be misleading. We cannot think that just some measures will be enough. It's not more that. It's much, much bigger, and we have to face it, we have to consider it, we have to really take a look. If not, it's just finding some way to wash your to think that you can solve it without really solving it.
We're not Alan has raised his hand. No? Okay. Sorry.
So we are close from the end. Someone would like to ask a last question or add a comment, or did we speak enough?
Are you still waiting?
Est-ce que vous serez là demain pour la restitution de nos travaux?
Would you be there tomorrow?
À quelle heure?
9.
9 heures le matin.
10.
No, it's a perfect transition because I can work.
Oui, Florian, oui, c'est possible.
Oui, après toi, Andreas, tu repars à midi, donc oui, c'est possible à 10h. 10h présent.
Pas de souci.
Si tu le souhaites.
Oui, pas de souci, bien sûr, je veux bien.
I'm raising a hand after my own speech. I have a comment for you, because before Lengefeld fire was mentioned, it's a good example of complexity and of the times we are living, the forest disturbances are increasing more and more. It is an aspect that we have to face considering the consistency of the supply of wood raw material. I worked a bit on wood coming from biostorm, was so important in Italy, and I have two key things to underline. First, it's nice that PFC activated a certification, a provenance certification to support the area, because not all wood that comes from forest disturbances is gone. Relevant parts can be used all the same, but you have to act in time, you have to be prepared along the entire supply chain. And so they activated this very interesting way to support the area. And unfortunately, I believe that this kind of action will be more and more needed in the future because forest disturbances are increasing. And that's the first comment. The second one is that nonetheless, in that cases, the situation is very complex because, some part of wood is lost, because the image of wood coming from forest disturbances is bad, and so enterprises prefer not to buy it. So it's a very, very complex topic that we will have to face more and more, I believe, at global level in the coming years.
Yeah.
Maybe now the discussion is open to all of us, or just ask.
You said not all the wood that comes from disturbances, natural disturbances, is lost. And I mean, do you mean that in a very human sense? Is it not lost to the market, or is it not lost to the forest? Because if you don't use that wood, as the forest, in theory, the soil should rebuild itself and the forest should grow again. So, in that sense, is it lost at all?
I was referring to the market, so I was seeing it from the production supply chain point of view. The point is that the amount of wood that we lose for sawing, for making wood-based products, the amount of wood we lose depends on the intensity of the disturbance. Think about a wildfire. If the wildfire is very huge, you are going to lose all wood. If not, and if you are able to stop the wildfire in time, you are able to recover a relevant part of wood. But this I was referring to the possibility of processing wood and to make wood-based products.
Just another question. I don't remember if you talked about this, but that 7% of the worldwide wood stock is European.
No, the forest area.
Yeah.
We have, that's from me, 7%, if you take the whole...
Can you just summarize the question? Answering for Anne, please.
Oh yeah, the question is, as I said in my speech, Alan, is that if you look at the whole global forest area, Europe only covers 7% of the forest area on the global scale. But European forest-based industries produce more than 35% of the global products that are traded. And that's really impressive when you think that means how efficient, and we still have a huge potential to use more, as we discussed, but the problem why we cannot mobilize more wood is either like in this area, Florian was so kindly showing you an amazing breathtaking party at the out, but the cost to harvest and to the logistics do not allow you really to manage parts of the forest. It's just an economic, how can I say, burden, and the same goes in some other areas due to the private ownership type, so that the owners do not know that they have a forest and so they do not manage it. But that's really, if you look at that, that's really impressive. And when we talk, and I really have to say, I love this intelligent question from you lady there, where you ask this complexity We talk about deforestation. Deforestation is rarely or never done for wood products. It's done for the land use shift towards either palm oil production or cattle breeding or whatever kind of thing. So you should, the people are excusing a sector which actually is affected negative, but not the actor of doing that. Alan? Yes, sorry, Alan, you want to say something? I don't know, I'll put you in. We can hear you.
Thank you, Andreas. What I want to say is I think there's been speaking of complexity, there have been many points about that we're operating within a dynamic system and that we, at our hazard, respond to the thing that we see now without understanding some future. So that goes to forest stand dynamics. It goes to species migration that you mentioned, Andreas. It goes to really understanding the externalities that make there circumstantial barriers to some kind of action that we might take rather than intrinsic barriers. And I think that's a really important thing to discuss here when we talk about cost, for example. We currently don't internalize a number of costs, true costs, not financial perhaps, right now measured under short-term investment protocols and regimens, but the real costs, such as biodiversity loss, sprawl, whatever it might be that creates impact, and those remain externalities in economic calculations. So I think what we have to understand is that it's not just a question of how much wood we can use or how much wood we can get out of the forest. It's really asking the forest what it can produce at any given time as it changes and adapt, trim our sails, as Seneca would have it, to respond to that. And I think that's going to be the most challenging problem, I think, in combating climate change, is the dynamics of economic value. We often said that if carbon were a currency rather than renminbi, euros, dollars, we would have a very, very different economy. And I think that's something we really want to try to take into account as we speak of these prohibitions against wood. Too much wood, will destroy forests. We need to start thinking in an incredibly systemically broad and dynamic way, and tracking and assessing constantly the impacts of the decisions we make.
Now you can applaud you. We applaud to you. Yes?
So would you say that by changing the main material in our industry to wood, we can sustain a capitalist society?
Can you summarize?
So you're asking, if we maintain or we change everything to wood, that we can continue with the economic model, I would say? Yes. No way. We have to change our economic model. I think the economic model we're using today, well, it doesn't work. We see the limits already everywhere. If we're honest, I'm half Finn. My mother was from Finland, and some Finnish friends said, we had a huge debt in the crisis. And I started laughing, said the whole world. It doesn't matter which country. We all have so many debts. I mean, honestly, we can all sit together at one long table and say, okay, we cut here and we start from scratch. The economic model should go from a linear model to a circular model. That's much more resilient, robust, and as Alan said, we have to take things into consideration that from my point of view, it's important to understand. We're suffering, Alan mentioned biodiversity loss. The huge part of that is not coming from forestry or forest management. The huge part is coming from application of herbicide, pesticides, and agriculture. I'm a farmer's boy. I'm not blaming any farmer who has to produce and has to try to make his money that they used to apply that because it would a little bit increase their harvest. This model has to change. We have to change a lot of these kind of things, taking these dynamics into direction, also saying that would mean, from my point of view, with this new going away from linear models to circular models, that we can also say, look, we have a problem here, but we are not the ones who are causing it. That we can clearly say our economic value is going down due to others. And then we have to establish a dialogue and find a way that this is not negative. We are too much blaming different things. You should not take a flight, or you should not drive your car, or you should not heat your house, or you should not have this space. This is wrong, I think. Yeah, we can discuss these kind of things, but we have to find ways that we have new models how to live, how to share, and to understand these dynamics. And the linear model is actually not working, but I would love to ask you what's your opinion, because you're smiling already, you probably disagree. So can you,
I agree again, and it's very difficult to change our economic model, but maybe two elements are entering into play right now. The first is that nowadays, unfortunately, almost all of us have experienced strong impacts of climate change. It was not so maybe 10 years ago, but nowadays it is part of our personal experience. And when something starts to affect so frequently and so strongly our lives, well, the social push will likely increase more and more as it is increasing right now. So this can be an element that can, I hope, trigger a further change. And the second, from the economic point of view, well, again, it's so difficult to change the economic system because, economics is economics. But when a system starts, the losses, the economic losses due to forest disturbances, droughts, floods, rainstorms, heavy rain, and whatsoever. So the economic losses are now becoming more and more frequent and more and more high. And so when an economic system starts to have too much economic losses, well, maybe this is another element that can help the system to change, to adapt itself. Let's hope. It's hard, but maybe these two elements will change the situation now and in the coming years.
Question? Yeah.
So there's the last question, or so yes, I will only want to say something. No? Okay. Alan? Okay. So really thank you very much for coming here, and special thanks to Alan. I know that it's so difficult to be in video, so really thank you. Thanks also to all of you for the week, but also for listening and reacting. And in English it was not easy for some of you, so thank you so much. And tomorrow, so we will present our work, because it's an intensive week. So tomorrow it will be a kind of exhibition of the work that we are creating. And to open this exhibition, we will welcome Roberto Dini and Silvia Lantelli. I would like to thank you so much, because your presentation was in this midday. Thank you. Midday, and you accept to transfer it tomorrow, because it was quite difficult for you to work. So thank you so much for this effort. And in the end, it's very important that you can have that you will open this exhibition, because your conference is Forêt Ecole, making school. It's about the important work of Politecnico Torino, the Department of Architecture and Design, that are working about pedagogical models with food, but also more in architecture. So So we are very glad to welcome you tomorrow. And now I think that we go to eat something and to rest and to finish our work. So thank you very much.
Sorry for you. Yeah, can you say they make a group picture with us? You're in the middle.